One of the ways that philosophy can immediately find relevance to everyday life is to go back to Socrates in ancient Athens, who famously says, just after he's been sentenced to death by a court of his peers, an Athenian court, he was charged with corrupting the youth and impiety or disbelief in the gods of the Athenian state.
This is Matthew David Siegel. He's a transdisciplinary researcher and teacher applying process philosophy across the natural and social sciences, including the study of consciousness. What philosophy means to you and why you see it as important in developing our day-to-day life or our quality of life?
Philosophy is really about this deeper sense of learning how to ask our own questions that are relevant to us as individuals and that have a more existential import, and that once asked open up a kind of portal into life and into a way of life. So rather than just being given questions by others or by a textbook, I think philosophy in this more original, existential, and indeed ancient sense, it's a way of life. It's a way of coming to ask our own questions and to orient our lives around our answers to those questions. And sometimes these are questions that only we can pose to ourselves. I think I would say my hope is that philosophy can be made more approachable and accessible to the culture at large and to people who haven't studied it formally by really grounding it again in our own pursuit of meaning in our own lives, our own pursuit of questions worth asking, questions that motivate us to deepen our experience and to pursue learning.
How people who are about to listen to this conversation should relate to it, in order to bring this exploration that you've, really dedicated so much of your time and energy to back to their own lives, to have impact in their own lives, all sort of under this umbrella of how can we make philosophy more approachable?
How each of us is situated in relationship to what we call wisdom. There's a wisdom within, there's a wisdom without, and perhaps the interior depths of our own soul and the exterior infinities of the cosmos in some way actually touch, that we can, I think, get into more as we go along here. All of philosophy is learning to die. And what he means by this is that when we examine our lives in the most intimate and intense way, it's not very long before we come face to face with the fact of the inevitability of death. We will die. Everyone we know and love will die. It's always been this way for human beings. We're mortal creatures.
What should we have in mind to be able to actually process that conversation and be able to make the most of it and do something with it?
I don't think anyone should be forced or feel externally pressured to pursue this type of inquiry. It's dangerous. It really is like jumping out of an airplane or like going up to the edge of a black hole and not being able to see the other side because no light can escape. I think it's important to be prepared and to feel like you have no choice but to pursue this type of inquiry. People are at in different places and engage in the mystery of being human in different ways. And this isn't for everyone, right? And so I guess I'm putting a warning label on philosophy.
What does it mean to cross the threshold? And as you go into it, if you can also build towards providing, an example to really like ground it.
To our sort of historical situation as people living in what we call the modern world, for most of human history, the vast majority of people across all continents have not believed that death was the end. And the idea that the human being and human experience, human consciousness is limited to the physical body or brain, and that it just sort of winks out of existence when the body and brain cease to function. It's quite a weird belief when placed in historical context, right? It's very easy when we're young to think we're invincible and to imagine that life just goes on, and there's certain thresholds that we pass in life as we get older and we gain more responsibilities. We become more rooted in something that's been actualized and that has a kind of inertia and weight, and in taking on these responsibilities, there's a sort of field of possibility that narrows when we look ahead into the future.
How do we do that, first of all? Where is this threshold, right? How do we find it? How do we practice dying before dying?
Dying before dying is a way of talking about rites of passage, right? Or initiatory experiences. And in the pre-modern world, again, across every human culture to inhabit this planet, there have been means provided to adolescents who are right at that threshold between childhood and adulthood to experience something that awakens them to a layer of reality that they hadn't yet been aware of or only dimly conscious. The way I would try to bridge to this insight for those who might feel skeptical is through just an observation of our own capacities for memory and speculative anticipation of the future, of what's to come.
What does that give us to enter this new way of looking at infinitude, as we've been talking about?
That is very real and very much not limited to just me. I think we have a much harder time being empathic, a much harder time being able to take the perspective of other people. Because when we do break through into this transpersonal domain and we contact that aspect of ourselves, which is not finite, which is in some way infinite and eternal, it's in that realization that we become one with everyone else. And this doesn't erase our individuality, but it gives us, it reminds us that there's still an umbilical cord that was never severed, that ties us back to a shared, and I would suggest a divine reality. And it's through our contact with that divine reality that we gain the capacity, both emotionally and the rational capacity to act in a way and to engage in the creation of community and the maintenance in a way that respects the freedom of everyone